All right, Tigers, here we go. Review podcast, Unit 7, Kennedy years. So let's go through notes quickly so that you are prepared for the test tomorrow. Okay. Kennedy's bio. We said born in Massachusetts, one of 9. All the health issues we talked about before, the adjustment, his bad health issues, especially through his back. Big focus of JFK. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. This big belief in service with all of these young people going through. Okay, we talked about how cute Kennedy was throughout. Does it make it cuter that he was a millionaire? Maybe. Went to Harvard. Member of the House in 47, member of the Senate in 53. We talked about Kennedy serving on PT 109. Remember the story about the coconut? Right? There's the story that we had right there. Remember, he kept the coconut on his desk. Campaign of 60. Remember, Kennedy and Nixon. Kennedy had a cortisone shot in his back. Felt great. Nixon had the flu. 5 o'clock shadow. No makeup. Kennedy won the debate because he looked much better. This picture is of the second debate. Note the differences here in terms of suit color and not blending in the background. If you listen to the debates on radio, Nixon won. Remember, Nixon's the youngest man ever elected president. Important states in 60 were Texas, Illinois, and New Jersey. You can see there were faithless electors in Alabama and Oklahoma. Kennedy wins by about 100,000 votes or so at that point. Criticisms of the young president. Too young, too inexperienced, too Catholic. Okay, that argument, should he be there? Remember, he made deals with the press because he wouldn't talk about the sordid affairs of his life, the quote-unquote sexual dalliances we saw in the video. Brought in the best and the brightest in his cabinet. Okay, here's Dean Rusk. Okay, here's Robert McNamara, and there's Bobby Kennedy. Remember, this irritated people in Washington because they were outsiders. Okay, there are the flexible response options. We talked about, unlike Eisenhower, didn't want nukes to be the only option. Remember the missile gap. In 61, we had 63 missiles. In 63, we had 424. So Eisenhower did focus on nuclear weapons. Kennedy even pushed the envelope even further. Kennedy also increased the defense budget. Okay, he used the Green Berets in places like Vietnam and Cuba. He launched the Alliance for Progress to try and help Latin America. Remember, the issue was dictators down there weren't representative democracies like France and Italy in the Marshall Plan. Young volunteers for the Peace Corps, Ghana and Tanzania, teach people democracy and capitalism. Diplomacy is working through communication to solve international problems. One of the areas of the test is 61, why it's a mean year. Make sure you make note of this. Also, don't forget these extra areas at the bottom right here to talk about why it was such a deal. Okay? Cuban Missile Crisis, closest we ever gotten to World War III. Khrushchev said the only way to save Cuba was with nuclear weapons. Castro feared another invasion, like he talked about in 1962. Okay, we talked about the images that were saw at this time. The missile camps, if assembled, Soviet Union would have first strike capability. Kennedy warned he would not allow nuclear missiles in Cuba. So on August 22nd, we see them. October 14th, the U-2s take picture, and they have approximately 80 missiles that can reach the continental United States. We talked about what should Kennedy do, these different options. He decided to quarantine the nation of Cuba by addressing the nation. He surrounded Cuba with 180 warships and demanded their immediate removal. Okay, most people thought it was a blockade, and you can see the line of the quarantine / blockade right here. Missiles were being stopped. Our fingers were on the trigger. Judgment Day, the Russian ships stopped. We talked about how close we actually came with the orders to fire. Okay, the standoff ended when a deal was reached and the missiles turned around, or the ships, turned around. Kennedy promised he would not invade Cuba and agreed to remove the missiles in Turkey. Okay, it showed how close we were and that Kennedy won this issue. Test ban treaty, the only place you can test a nuclear weapon is underground. Hotline is a direct unbreakable connection with the Soviet Union. Relations got worse with the Soviets. In fact, we don't trade with Cuba, and we try to kill Castro again. And the Russians build up so that they never have to back down again. Kennedy's popularity up to about 74%. Remember the idea of the Kennedy Doctrine in comparison to the Eisenhower Doctrine. Eisenhower focused on one area of the world, the Middle East. Kennedy's going to focus on bearing any burden, meeting any hardship, supporting any friend, opposing any foe. He's a true Cold Warrior. It's us against them, and we'll do anything we need to, right? However, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, we talked about how we need to bring the Russians to the peace table through this idea of détente. So there you could see a differentiation between the two there, okay? Domestically, we talked about the very minor way that Kennedy went through his domestic policy. Fair Labor Standards Act, Social Security, Housing Act, and the argument of U.S. Steel. Remember, U.S. Steel was located in Pennsylvania, right? He truly would be a conservative Democrat, if not a Republican today. Some other issues that he came through with: Equal Pay Act of 63, 80% of what men make, and there can be no difference in pay. We talked about the story of Carlos Marcello with regard to the Kennedy assassination. Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. Lee Harvey. Remember, Kennedy was there to campaign for the election. There's Dealey Plaza. There's the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. There is the grassy knoll. Remember, right onto Houston, left onto Elm to get there. Okay, right? We talked about this Zapruder film. Okay, there's JFK. There's Jackie. There's Governor Connolly. There's Nellie at that point, right? Some background about Oswald. Okay, 24, Marine Corps sharpshooter, kicked out of the Soviet Union, moved back to New Orleans with Marcello. We talked about him buying the gun and all the evidence that built up to that point. There's his view. Remember, he was able to shoot a gun very well from 200 yards distance. From the windowsill down to the roadway is about 96 yards. Okay. We talked about James Teague claiming that the shot came from the grassy knoll. Remember, the bullet ended up in this pillar here of the triple underpass. We talked about the magic bullet, this picture being incorrect, Kennedy sitting lower than the president at that time, and how one bullet could make 7 wounds in 2 people. The kill shot coming from the back, remember Kennedy's back brace engaged, small hole in the back, big hole in the top, right? Kennedy dies instantly. Oswald is seen in the break room of the Texas School Book Depository at 12:31. We know he then leaves the building and changes his clothes. He shoots J.D. Tippit and is then arrested in a Dallas movie theater. We talked about all of the physical evidence that points to a lone assassin. We also talked about the physical evidence that points against or towards a conspiracy, especially the magic bullet and the doctors at Parkland Memorial Hospital. Oswald is shot by Jack Ruby on Sunday, November 24th. Ruby is sentenced to death and dies in prison 2 years later of cancer. And we talked about all the issues before of who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to kill JFK. I hope this helps. Enjoy. Go Tigers.